Okay, the next chapter in the Clue in the Crumbling Wall is chapter 19, which is titled Cinderella's Slipper. Picking up a sledgehammer, Cobb's partner started toward the poet's nook. Nancy, Bess, and George sought to melt into the shadows, but they knew they could not escape detection. "Be with you in a minute, Biggs," Cobb called. "I want to see if there's anything hidden in this niche." Biggs! The name electrified the three girls. Hadn't Walter Heath named him in the diary as a suspicious person? Could he be the chauffeur, searching perhaps for the bottles of dye his former employer had secreted on the premises? Biggs now was just outside the poet's nook. Nancy and her friends gave up all hope of escaping detection. Then, just as the fellow was about to enter, running footsteps could be heard along the flagstones. Startled, the man paused and looked down the cloister. Nancy tiptoed forward and peeked out. Biggs was the one who had signaled from the tower. She was just in time to see a boy who was gesticulating wildly toward the beach. "Hey, come quick," the lad shouted. "I've got something to show you." Cobb was irritated. "Drat that boy," he muttered. "How did he get here? We told him to keep away from Heath Castle." As the youngster came closer, gasping for breath, the man began to berate him. "You know better than to come here again. I told you not to follow me." "I've got something to tell you." "Out with it." "None on your life," the boy retorted craftily. "You gotta pay me." "Get out of here and leave us alone." "Maybe we'd better hear what he has to say," Biggs urged. "It may be important." "Give me a quarter and I'll tell you," the boy demanded. "Not a cent less." Biggs and Cobb were worried. The latter took a coin from his pocket and tossed it angrily at the boy. "There," he snapped. "Now what have you got to tell us?" "Part of the beach wall has been knocked down. Someone came through a hole in it, too." "How do you know that?" Biggs demanded tensely. "Footprints on the ground. Want to see 'em?" "Guess we'd better," Cobb nodded, a feeling of concern taking the place of his anger. "If anyone's on these premises, we better find out about it." "If the place is being watched, I'm clearing out of here," Biggs added in fright. "Don't be a sap," Cobb retorted. "If anyone came into the gardens through this passage, he's got to go out the same way. All we have to do is guard the hole in the wall and we'll catch him." "I'm not so sure," muttered Biggs, "and I don't want to sit here all day and wait." "What of it if we catch the fellow?" demanded Cobb. The two men followed the lad and soon were out of sight. When their voices died away, Nancy stepped cautiously from her hiding place. "I believe that boy was Jetty Hooker," she declared excitedly. "I didn't see him very well, but from the glimpse I caught of him, he certainly resembled Joan's playmate." Bess was not so interested in this as in her own troubles. "Did you hear what those men said about guarding the exit?" she fretted. "How are we going to get out of here?" "So long as the men stay on the beach, we're fairly safe," replied Nancy, "but I'm worried about me Hardy." "That's so," agreed George, who had dropped down on the stone bench in the nook. "I forgot all about him." "Oh, I hope they don't harm the poor man." As there was no way in which the girls could warn the clam digger, they considered their own plight. It seemed pretty serious. "We can't go back to the beach," wailed Bess. "And we can't go on because the castle door is locked." "There's one thing we can do," George suddenly said, rising from the bench and stalking across the cloister. "What's that?" asked Bess, hopefully. Her cousin pointed. Between two of the columns, intertwined with vines, were steps leading down into a small, tangled garden. "See if there's a way out through here," George replied. She and the others investigated the little garden, which had walls on each side, too high to scale. There was not a single opening in them. The girls had been defeated again. "We're certainly in a tight spot," said George, wondering what their next move ought to be. Bess sat down in the middle of a weed-grown path. "I'm so discouraged I could cry," she owned up. "Maybe a drink of water will revive you," suggested her cousin practically. On the rear wall of the garden was an artistic fountain from which spouted a little stream. Bess walked over to it and drank freely. "It's wonderful water," she announced, "and cool. It must be from a spring." Nancy and George cupped their hands and filled them several times. They agreed the water was unusually refreshing. "Certainly gives you a lift," admitted Bess. "I feel now as if I wouldn't mind facing those men." Nancy suddenly noticed something on the crumbling wall just beneath the fountain. Parting some vines to get a better view, she stared in astonishment. "Girls, look!" she cried. "On the wall!" The vines had grown over a small block of cement, which had been set into stones. Visible on it was the imprint of a woman's slipper. Directly beneath appeared a single word: Cinderella. "Cinderella's dancing slipper," George laughed. "Whoever would do such a crazy thing?" "I'm not sure it was crazy," Nancy replied, her mind busily fitting together two pieces of the Heath puzzle. "I'd say it's romantic. It may have been Walter Heath's way of paying a compliment to someone." "A storybook character?" asked Bess. "No, a beautiful dancer named Floriana. Don't you recall the note I found in his handwriting, which began, 'Dear C'? C could stand for Cinderella," George acknowledged. "It also could indicate a dozen other names." Nancy measured the dainty little shoe print with her hand. "Oh, I'm sure this is Floriana's," she went on triumphantly. "It's the clue we need, and we found it in a crumbling old wall." Bess and George did not follow their friend's reasoning and said so. "I mean the clue Walter Heath mentioned in his will," Nancy explained. "He said Floriana would be able to identify herself in a special way. She could do it by means of this slipper print, couldn't she?" "The shoe is very small," Bess admitted. "Not many girls could wear such a tiny size." "Wouldn't anyone except Floriana know about this imprint in the wall?" asked George skeptically. "Possibly," said Nancy, "but Floriana would be the only person to have proof she was the one he called Cinderella." "You mean no imposter would have a shoe or other identification?" inquired George. "Exactly." "If you've really stumbled on a secret, Nancy, we mustn't breathe a word of it," said Bess, deeply impressed. The three girls agreed to maintain absolute silence regarding the discovery. Carefully, they covered the imprint with the vines, speculating as to whether anything of value might be hidden behind the cement block. "We can't find out today," Nancy said. "We'd have to use tools to move it." "It would just be our luck if Cobb and Biggs decide to smash the fountain," George remarked. "Then we'd be too late." Suddenly, she stiffened. "Listen," she cried. "What's that?" At the end of the cloister, the castle wall was opening with a groaning sound. Someone was coming out. Whoever it was would see them in another moment. "Quick," Nancy directed in a whisper. "Lie down here in the tall grass and weeds. It's our only chance." Bess and George flattened themselves on the ground. Nancy was able to dart behind a bush leafy enough for protection, but not too thick for her to see through. A man, slightly stooped, came walking with a cat-like tread along the flagstone cloister. He paused to examine the vines which Bess had disturbed near the steps. Nancy's heart stood still. The man was Hector Keep. The lawyer glanced toward the garden, but evidently saw no one, for he strode on toward the beach, his hands clasped behind him. "Let's go," Nancy whispered jubilantly a moment later. "The castle door may be open." As the girls made a dash for it, she added, "I'll get the metal box. We better not leave it behind. It's too precious to lose." Reaching the poet's nook, she hastily removed the loose stone from the wall. George held it while Nancy reached inside. "Hurry," urged Bess, who was standing guard. "One of those men may come back any minute." Nancy retrieved the metal box while George slid the stone back into place. "Oh, please come," Bess pleaded, and looked relieved when the others appeared. Stealing noiselessly along, the three girls reached the castle. The door was unlocked. It made such a loud noise when they pulled it open that Nancy was fearful the sound would carry to the beach. "What a weird place," George commented as they hurried inside and Nancy led the way along the winding corridor toward the front entrance. "For all we know, we may be prisoners," Bess worried. "Let's get out of here as soon as we can." Nancy, fairly familiar with the floor plan, found the main entrance. It was locked, but another door close by opened when she turned the knob. "This is a break for us," George exclaimed, going out first. She stepped onto a terrace and there stopped short. Oh, she cried. "Now what?" asked Nancy, closing the door. Lying at the foot of the steps from the terrace were the two huge dogs the girls had met before. They began to growl menacingly. "Well, hello, old fellows. We meet again," Nancy said cheerily. But her friendly attitude did not work this time. The animals would not allow the girls to descend the steps. "You try it alone, Nancy," suggested Bess. This was no better. The hounds were acting very strangely indeed. What can be wrong? Nancy muttered, perplexed. The other day these same dogs let me pass. Nancy shifted the metal box under her arm, and the dogs growled even more fiercely. Why, it's this box, she realized. They think I'm trying to steal something from the castle. Telling her friends she would return in a minute, Nancy ran back inside. It required but a minute to strip the box of the photographs and diary. Stuffing them beneath her sweater, she looked around. Where can I hide the box, she thought. Suddenly her eyes caught sight of a door. That closet will do, she told herself. Darting across the big hall, she yanked open the door and placed the metal container on the floor. As she did so, the girl could hear footsteps not far away. Someone was coming along the winding corridor. Nancy flew back to the terrace. The dogs growled but did not try to molest her this time. She hurried down the steps, her friends behind her. Bess was fearful but tried not to show it. You girls go on ahead, ordered Nancy. I'll keep the dogs busy until you get a good start. Then I'll follow. Since there was no time to lose, they obeyed. 30 seconds later, Nancy followed them. The hounds set up a fearful barking as they leaped alongside the fleeing girl. The next minute, Hector Keep's figure framed the doorway. Nancy could not avoid being seen by him, although she covered her face with her free hand and kept running. Hey, you, the lawyer shouted furiously. Stop! Stop! Nancy ignored his cries. Catching up with her friends, she urged them to a faster pace. Quick! The wall, she panted, holding her treasure close inside her sweater. That's the end of the chapter.